Please Can I Have a Mummy and Daddy is sponsored by orphans in need. Let's give them hope for a better tomorrow.
This is little Layla. Layla is often left to fend for herself. She doesn't get much to eat or drink. Her mother, consumed by drug addiction, is unaware of Layla's needs and forgets about her. Her mother's partner is often violent and abusive. In the UK, one child dies at the hands of their parents every week through abuse and neglect. Children in this situation are sometimes so desperate that they're forced to eat their own feces and even drink from the toilet brush holder. Layla's one of the lucky ones. Social services will rescue Layla from her life of hell. But what is the future for Layla? I am a professional social worker for a local authority in southwest London, and my name is Rahim Jung. I'm a father of 5 children, and in my spare time I coach a local football team. How many of us are aware that thousands of children every year slip silently into the care system, children just like little Layla? In England alone, there are over 65,000 children in care. But how many of those are Muslim? Well, sadly, statistics are only kept on the ethnicity of children, but not on their religion. Going on last year's figures, we can estimate that there are over 2,000 Muslim children in the care system. Now, alarmingly, 740 are Pakistani and 410 are Bangladeshi. But there are also Muslim children from Indian, Somalian, from Nigerian, Arab, Afghani and Iraqi backgrounds. And that's not to mention the significant numbers of Muslim children who are from mixed backgrounds. Typically, a small percentage of children go on to need adopting, but from my calculations, that's still close to 100 Muslim children every year. Some of them will be adopted, but sadly, others won't. Adoption for these children is the hope of a better life, yet we find that there's a serious shortfall of Muslims to adopt them. In this forthcoming documentary series, I'm on a mission to highlight why it's so imperative, indeed even an obligation, for Muslims to engage in adoption. When we think of adoption, we tend to think in terms of people who couldn't have their own children and want to start a family. So they go along to adopt a child to meet their own emotional need to become parents. But who are these children? How do they come into the need to be adopted in the first place? How do they come into care? To learn more about this, I met up with Dr. Julie Selwyn at the Birkbeck University Conference on Adoption, where she was one of the keynote speakers. Dr. Selwyn runs the Hadley Centre for Studies on Fostering and Adoption.
Now, when we're trying to make comparisons between long-term foster care and adoption, it's very difficult.
When we talk about children in care, it's a very general term. Can you tell us a little bit about who these children are and how they end up in care?
Most of them are there because they come from backgrounds where they have been abused and neglected. Their parents may have mental health problems, They often have drug and alcohol misuse. Sometimes they have learning difficulties. And because of a multitude of reasons, the children can no longer live with their birth families and they come into the care system. Now, quite a good percentage of those children go back home again. Parents sort their lives out, they get help from their social worker, but there are a group of children where it's not safe for them to go back home.
Julie painted a sad picture of how children end up in the care system. But I wanted to know if Muslim children too are vulnerable to abuse and neglect. The NSPCC held a conference on protecting specifically Muslim children. So I thought I'd speak to Saliha Islam, who runs the NSPCC Asian Helpline, and ask her what's going on. Tell us a little bit more about the helpline, what type of calls you're receiving and what the issues are that you're dealing with.
Well, in the last 8 years, we've had over 12,000 calls come to the helpline in regards to child abuse or safeguarding. So what happens is an adult will ring the helpline about a child that they're concerned about. That could be a family member, it could be a neighbour. We also have professionals who ring us up and they're concerned about families or children. And the issues are predominantly around neglect, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and of course a very taboo subject, sexual abuse. We really need to kind of get out of that fantasy that things don't happen within our own community.
We see in the media high-profile cases where children end up being killed by their parents. Are you aware of this sort of stuff going on in the Muslim community?
There's the horrific case of baby Talha. That is just so sad. And I don't think that enough Muslims know about this case. They probably think it just happens to baby P. But baby Talha died horrifically. He was only 16 months old and he was killed by his father and his stepmother. Fortunately, many children can be rescued from situations before they get to that stage and can be put into the care system and inshallah then be placed for adoption for a long-term secure placement.
Saliha also went on to explain that unfortunately the baby Talha case is not an isolated one. She told us about baby Sanam, who's a Gujarati girl from a Muslim background. This 2-year-old girl used to be left in her home alone while the mother and boyfriend went out drinking. When social services got involved, they found that this girl had more than 107 injuries. I mean, all 4 limbs were broken in the weeks leading up to her death. And at the court case, the jury were actually shown footage of Sanam convulsing on the floor with her eyes bulging. And this was due to fat leakage from her bones that was leaking into her bloodstream. And it's this that actually led to her death ultimately. Thank goodness these people are now behind bars. Stories such as this are high profile and ended up in a fatality. But social workers in child protection come across cases of abuse and neglect as a matter of routine. Children who suffer this horrendous abuse, the type of stuff we've heard about, and end up in the care system, don't we think that it really is our responsibility to try and offer these children a home, bring them somewhere safe and give them a new chance to start again? One social worker I spoke to said she'd just been dealing with a 1-year-old Muslim boy who'd been hospitalised. She said that someone in his family had poured acid down his throat. They'd even left finger marks on his cheeks where they'd forced him. She said that the general public are protected from what she sees and that we would be shocked by the reality. It was now her job to find an adopter for him. And I recall seeing an advert for a little girl who was being advertised for adoption. There was a photo of her looking so beautiful in her pretty dress, smiling, sat in a pushchair, and underneath her foster care had said that her smile could light up a room. She was blind in one eye, only had partial hearing and neurological damage. But this wasn't because she was born that way, but shockingly, her parents had done that to her. I always wondered what became of her. Children who enter care due to abuse and neglect represent 62% of looked after children. But there are a number of other reasons that children can become looked after. For instance, a single parent suffering from illness or disability might need the children to stay in foster care for a while. But for those who need to be adopted, I wanted to find out what the prospects are for Muslim children compared to other children in the care system.
In our Pathways to Permanence study, we do know that Asian children wait the longest and they're the least likely to be placed. Most of the white children were placed, most of the mixed ethnicity children were placed, but it was the Asian children that were never found a family. Those who were placed tended to be very young, under the age of 2. There was very little interest in older children who needed a new family. So if a child was older than the age of 2, sometimes nobody came forward.
We're often led to believe that there are a significant number of babies in the care system who are waiting to be adopted, but at the same time we're told that adopters are not able to find babies. What's going on there?
If, after many attempts to try and support the family, the child can't be returned home, adoption cannot go ahead without the child's case first being heard by the court, because the birth family has to have every opportunity to present their case. Of course, some birth families don't want their children, and those children go through the system quite quickly. But there's others where the court system gets dragged on for months at a time, so that by the time the case has been heard, the child may be 2, 2.5.
And this type of delay, what impact does this have on a child?
It has quite a lot of impact. For every year that the child is delayed, the chances of being adopted reduce by about 20%. Of course, psychologically for the child is in a kind of limbo situation, doesn't know where they're going to be living, maybe being moved around the care system, changing foster care placements, and getting more and more unsettled. For many children in the care system, a quarter of babies, infants, have moved 4 times before they're even 1. So these children are moving around and it creates tremendous instability in their lives. So there are psychological effects on children as well of not being moved quickly into adoptive families.
Babies and young children need to form a loving bond, or what's called an attachment with an adult, in order to build trust and security. This allows the child to develop emotionally. Not having someone hug, caress and even kiss a child in those very early days decreases the child's chances of a positive bonding. The ability to form an attachment peaks at 6 to 18 months, yet babies taken into care wait on average 2.25 years to be adopted, so the ideal age for bonding with new parents has often passed. The instability of lingering in care and having several carers threatens this attachment potential, and children have been known to display symptoms like self-harming, developmental and speech delay.